Welcome back. This time we're talking cost. Cost for what? Cost for a universal basic income. Last episode we talked about how much would be a reasonable number to set a basic income for America at. What we came to was $1,000 a person. And some of you, if you're doing good, you went and decided to go and check the cost of that, and it had a great big T by it. But it really wasn't that much, was it? Probably not when you really look at the American budget, but when you look at just the budget that's not dedicated to things already, it starts to seem pretty steep. So, how do we actually pay for that? Well, that's where we are today. So, how do you pay for a UBI? Well, there are a few ways, a number of them. One thing about it is that anytime a UBI goes into effect, it adds to your buying power for your entire population. So you're going to get what is normally recouped from your basic taxes. But that alone is not going to do it. So where else can you get it from? Well, you can start with something that is often, very often, underestimated when most people look at the cost per UBI, and that's in your savings. How much can you really save doing a universal basic income? Well, the first thing that you're going to save on is crime. We mentioned that before. In Namibia, they actually reduced their crime rate by over 36%.
But that doesn't seem like very much.
I mean, so 1/3 less people were committing crimes. Is that really gonna be notable? Well, yes it is. And the reason for that is the grossly inflated amount that America cost per person to house prisoners. Okay, so let's look at some of that cost. Let's look at, here we go, this will be the first link for y'all. It costs anywhere between $20,000 and $40,000 per year to house inmates in federal and state correction facilities. That's pretty high. Let's see, according to the same little snatch of data here, and this was taken in 2010, so this information is a bit dated. The average annual cost of our incarceration for federal prisons was $22,284 per inmate. Damn. Not to mention that that's just housing them. That's just housing and caring for them. That's not taking into consideration how much is lost in the community that is without them, because many of our inmates are non-violent offenders. Those that had fines they couldn't pay, or are in there for minor drug possession, maybe some other petty crimes like some minor theft. Let's see, how about some more updated numbers? Let's go. The federalregister.gov. That sounds pretty official. What are these numbers from? 2016 and 17. That's a lot more relevant. The fee to cover the average cost of incarceration for federal inmates was $34,700 and change. Yikes. That's just under $95 a day. I showed y'all in the last video that a UBI would only cost $33 a day. So releasing one person or not having a one person go to jail will pay for 3. Wait a second. We just found that criminality in one of the UBI trials was reduced by 36%. Wow, those numbers suddenly sound pretty good, right? That's just the savings from one aspect of releasing a UBI. It's not going to be everything, not even remotely close to everything, but that's still pretty high. Let's see. Some of the other costs for slightly more expensive centers went down to $79.69 a day. And that's still over double the $33 a day that I explained in the previous video. So yeah, there's that to look at. Not to mention the whole reduced recidivate rate from the California trial that was done specifically with released former inmates, showing that the UBI did have a high impact on their inclination toward recommitting. So you're looking at a pretty hefty savings in imprisonment. America really doesn't spend that much on imprisonment, right? Well, it does. It's higher than the vast majority of other countries, which, by the way, a lot of this, how you pay for it, isn't going to apply as well in other countries, because the next point is going to be about medical cost, which will kind of apply for other countries, but not as impactfully as it will in America. As most other countries have a socialized medical system. They've got some form of Medicare for all, single payer, something where the state picks up that check, deal with it on a federal level. Well, that is still a place where you can save quite a lot, because the vast majority of medical cost for a society is typically cost caused by poverty. We talked earlier in this series about things that get put off, things that have to wait, things that end up in really, really bad situations, like finding out you suddenly need surgery because one of your major joints got badly damaged because you've been using poor quality shoes, supports, bedding for years on end, because it could always wait, right? You had something more pressing you needed to get. Something else that seemed like more of an emergency. Lumps, rashes, hell, even fevers that get put off. Because, oh, it didn't seem like that big a thing, and maybe next week. Oh, maybe I'll wait till next month. We might have a little bit more to spare next month. It's okay. Something over the counter will do. It's not that bad, really. We're sure. What about emergency room cost? How many of you have had a broken bone? Because that can be hundreds of dollars. Cut yourself real bad in the kitchen? Those stitches are gonna cost you. It's gonna be bad. How many of you have done the really, really bad medical sin of not taking all of your antibiotics because you knew you might need to save those couple extras for later, and it ended up with you having some form of later or resistant bug that couldn't be treated with the normal medications, and ended up not just costing you, but the whole medical system more money. I know, I get it. I really do. But seriously, take all of your pills. It's for the best for everyone. I know that's hard to hear. And that's something that will probably actually increase with a UBI. People will more easily be able to afford medication as they need it, which will actually improve people doing the things that are good for overall community health that will affect not just their local communities, but potentially the planet. Because we now live in a global society. That flu that somebody had when they went off for a meeting with investors now might be several countries away where things aren't necessarily so good. Or someone might have just had friends or family visit from elsewhere, and suddenly they're coughing and they don't know why. World health. Not just local health, world health. Okay, so you have savings there in actual good medical practice. You also have savings in nutrition, healthier children, healthier birth rates. That's something that's been found in a lot of UBI trials that have been held over long periods of time, is you end up with healthier children being born, putting them in a better place from day one. All of these things reduce cost. They end up in cost savings. Okay, so what else? That can't possibly make it all up, and it doesn't. So where else are we moving from here? Well, now you're starting to get into the space where you start to need some additional taxation. Oh no, that could be bad, right? Well, that depends on whether it's on the common person or not. Because, say, we have a really big problem right now. It's called climate change. Yeah, if y'all want to debate me on that, we'll get into it later. But for those of you that do believe in it, making there be a tax upon companies for their pollution that is higher than current, or simply removing some of the subsidies from the polluters that we currently support, will create a fair amount of revenue. Not a huge amount, but a fair amount of it. Also, there is the creation of jobs. As we saw with the Alaska trial, even for a relatively far out there and difficult state to live in, they created a very large number of jobs relative to the UBI that they were putting out. So there's going to be a considerable number of jobs created. We've already gone over how in some of the more easy to put off tasks, easy to put off cost, like repairs for non-essential bits of the house or the car, can be a thing. They can actually increase how much is going to be rolling around in your community, produce jobs, produce markets, generalized raised buying power can raise the amount of businesses that just come into the country as a whole, which might bring some more manufacturing. It's arguable whether or not that's going to mean anything for workers, and we'll get to automation shortly. Let's see, what else can we pull from? Well, there is always the bloated budgets for, say, the military. But let's face it, this is America. That's never going to get touched. It's just not. There are other things, A really controversial thing is potentially cutting into some of the other welfare services that would be outside of UBI, which a lot of people get really leery of that, and I get it. I really do. I'll tackle that more in depth in the welfare video specifically, but there are a number of those services that can probably be reduced. I don't think that most of them should be cut, but with a UBI, some of them probably would no longer be needed in general, especially those that are heavily means tested. Because that's one of the keys of universal basic income. We're not means testing it. A lot of the various welfare programs, if people were receiving $1,000 a month, unless it was specifically written into the law, they would no longer be able to receive their means tested assistance. So it might just wash that out by accident, essentially. But a lot of people are against that. I get it. And I would like to see some of the programs currently implemented survive past UBI passing. But first, we've got to get to a UBI at all. So, what's left? There's got to be something left, right? Well, there is. It is called a value-added tax. Wait, why not a wealth tax? A value-added tax sounds like it's going to be hitting a lot more people. Well, the problem with a wealth tax is that in a lot of cases it's really hard to tax what is known as wealth. Are you taxing just cash? Are you taxing land? Are you taxing stocks? What are you taxing? Wealth taxes get complicated. And wealthy people have the money to afford a lot of lawyers. A wealthy person might be willing to spend $1 million to save $1 million. Beyond anything else that they've got available, between lawyers and accountants, a wealth tax really isn't that efficient. It's a nice thought. I'm okay with it. But it's really not proven to be that efficient in other areas where it's been tried. It depends on what the wealth tax entails. Some wealth taxes, they work, but they're not usually marketed as a wealth tax. They're usually marketed as something else. They're typically on something like property, which I think is one of the most effective ways to do it. Tax land. Land is a very measurable thing. And land values can fluctuate based on the community. Taxing land can actually be a really good thing because it encourages people who own a lot of land in the area to try to make those communities stronger, to open more businesses there, to encourage the general well-being of the area, to reduce pollution in the area. Makes everything better. But that's still something that's going to be really complicated to get passed. And for a UBI to be the most likely to pass and the most efficient, the most stable and sustainable, you need something that is going to be there, that is going to grow, that is going to actually be in a positive feedback loop with the UBI itself. Which just brings us back to a value-added tax. What is a value-added tax? A value-added tax is a tax on goods. It is a tax on things that are purchased and sold and generally traded. Okay, so how is it figured? Well, it's figured on the value added to a product at every step of its creation. It is figured by how much change has been made in that product in every step along its route to the actual customer, which is why a lot of people see it as a mixed tax between customer and producer. And that's part of why you've been seeing me mess with the yarn, because I'm going to do a whole video on a value-added tax. The thing about a value-added tax and why it's cited as one of the big things to put a UBI funding around is because they tend to survive really well. The vast majority of places that have implemented a value-added tax still have one. In fact, most European countries have a value-added tax. Some of them hate it. Some of them really don't care. Some of them, it's varied since implementation. But practically all of them that have ever implemented one still have one. Whereas most of the countries that have implemented something that would be called a wealth tax have ended up finding it makes far less than it's estimated to, and eventually gotten rid of it. A value-added tax can be really useful because it's going to encourage some behaviors that don't often get talked about because people look at the end cost for the people buying the goods. But it also encourages businesses to source locally because that reduces their supply chain. And if you get taxed at every point along your supply chain, you're going to want to minimize that. It also encourages businesses to try and minimize waste because that is now being taxed alongside a possible eco tax, some kind of carbon tax or pollution tax is going to help. They're going to compound on each other and create a positive feedback loop. But these are things that get into a handful more theoreticals, and I would rather give people a better basis for what a value-added tax is and how it will personally affect them before trying to get into some of the more complementary things that would be essentially side effects. Now, that still leaves some people going, well, what if these numbers don't quite balance? And the thing with a lot of UBI plans is that they won't on day one, because you're also looking at needing time for these savings to kick into effect, for people to change their behavior, for the new jobs to come into the areas affected by the UBI, sometimes for people to decide to move so that they can make a better use of their UBI, which is why a lot of UBI plans have a certain period of time after their implementation when they run a negative before they stabilize and then start running positive. But we'll get further into all of those things. These give you a basic grasp of where you can draw money from. You're going to get savings from lower imprisonment, savings from lower healthcare cost. You can do things that will help secondary problems by taxing certain things and behaviors that will turn an encouragement cycle. You can make things that have positive feedback loops to better influence how much each individual part gives. There are options. There are going to be new jobs and new savings and changes to behavior, and it'll take time. But that is for another time. Bye.